say? Vision and mind and young, would you say? Mommy said a big heart, chin up queen. Daddy said, girl, you can be who you want. Academic way first, just to make sure. Tight the loose ends, yeah, now.
Hello, Prash, and welcome to PhD Hard Talk. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for wanting to be a guest and literally discussing your research with me. Could you please introduce yourself, your research, and what year you're in, and then we can crack on.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Noma, on Hard Talks. It's fantastic to get your invite. I've followed the page as well. So this is sort of, I'm feeling like a celebrity today. So thank you for that. so, so
Thank you
I'm
for
actually,
following as well.
So I'm actually from Fiji, and I'm Prash Goundar and Prash. And I was awarded the University of New England's International Scholarship to do a PhD last year. So I moved to Armadale, where the main campus of UNE is, at the mid of this year. And I'm actually in my final year, sort of. I have got just about a few more months, or you can say until October next year, to submit my research. So my thesis is actually, I'm in linguistics, so my PhD is in linguistics. And the title of my thesis is Writing Skills for Undergraduate Students in Fiji. That's to do with tackling educational inequalities and facilitating epistemic access. So what the research is looking at is the undergraduate students' academic skills, writing skills in a 1 year period. So from the time that they join the university, that's their first year, until the time that they have finished their first year. So it's a 1 year study. I finished my data collection and all of that. And the two folds to the study. So we are using a framework which is called CEFR, which has been used in Europe, but it has not been applied to the South Pacific context. And my study is the first one to do that in the South Pacific context, which is, of course, Fiji. And then we are looking at educational inequalities that the students have faced, because we cannot assume that, when students come to university, because Fiji is located in the islands, there are about 300 islands. So you cannot say that when the students enter the university, everybody's going to have the same level of English. But what we don't know is what is stopping them from achieving sort of the same level of English as someone who's attending an urban school is achieving. So the research really gave me an insight to talk to students and find out about all these problems that they're having. And the data has been amazing. The interviews have been amazing, the kind of insights that they have given. But I'm not going to reveal all, because I know you will have some questions based on it later. So
No, amazing. Thank you for the summary. And yes, you are correct. I've got questions. So I guess that the first thing is, in terms of Fiji, something that I found really intriguing is that you've got the urban, the semi-urban high schools, and then you've got the rural high schools, just as you've touched on it there. I guess the question that I have is, why concentrate on all three instead of the rural? Because they're further afield, and they should surely, with my own knowledge, not research, have less English, maybe capability skills based on them being in the rural areas. Why not concentrate on that group?
Yes, a very, very valid question, definitely. So what we wanted to do is to gain the kind of inequality that exists. We could just say that the rural school, or we could just take the rural school and then, but we didn't have anything to match that against. So for example, if we are just looking at the rural school and we're just saying, complaining, or, the students are just venting on the problem. But the urban school, we don't know the data, because there was nothing recorded about the urban school. So there was nothing to compare it with. And interestingly, Noma, this was very interesting. Like what I found in the study is that when we looked at urban students, they had the similar problems that the rural school students had. So we are saying that, urban and rural and all, but the problems were the same. They came up with, I remember talking to a student, and he mentioned in an urban school that they didn't have an English teacher for a whole term. And that's an urban school, so what's happening? So I said, what did you do? How did you manage? They said, well, our teacher was sick. We didn't have somebody for a whole month. I'm sorry, a whole term. And we had people coming in and out. And then finally, when we got a teacher replacement, the person had to rush through the coverage. So if we are just saying, oh, the problems just exist in rural schools, well, they kind of not really stick there. They are also in the urban schools as well. So the idea was to have a comparative data to, not just say that this is the only place where we can find problems, but how can we compare this information? So we took on both sides.
No, thank you. That's quite interesting. I guess, you wouldn't really think of absence as a big factor
Right.
that will influence someone's learning, in normal thinking. But actually, when you're saying it now with reasoning, I can see that it can be a challenge. So I guess, the next thing that you mentioned was in your introduction was the Common European Framework for Reference that you said you used. Again, the question is, that's a former colony. Why would you use a framework that's been, used in the Western world and to a country that's fought for its independence in many ways, and then bring back a framework that's used for an ideology that we're saying, no, we don't want it anymore. We want to be independent. So please take me through that reasoning, and I'm sure the audience at home would love to know as to why you thought that would be. I can see the gap, it hasn't been used before, but I'm sure there's other reasons as well.
Yes, fantastic. I think this is one sort of question that keeps coming up quite a lot. People do bring it up, and then I say. So when I started looking at frameworks which I could actually use for my study, because I didn't want a study where I've got just to measure the students' level when they come in at the university and when they go out at the university. So I looked at different frameworks. We were looking at IELTS test and TOEFL test and all of that. So when we started looking at it, what we found is all these tests are sort of connected to the CEFR. They have got their design from there. So when we looked at, and then I went more in detail looking at the CEFR, and then I found out that they had used about 2,000 metrics or rubrics to come up with their design. So then itself was validating that they had used so many of these things. Then which one should I use? Should I go for IELTS? Should I use for TOEFL or something like that? And then a whole lot of reading and literature came into the picture. And then we realized that if we say IELTS and all these things, these are things that the students sort of, if they think about migration, they will have to sit for an IELTS test. In Fiji, if they think about migration, they would all have to sit for an IELTS test and all those things. But this particular framework, because it has sort of given birth to all other frameworks that is being used in the language testing field, it made more sense to go with this particular system, because I looked at the scales that they provide. It sort of gives the student a good idea of where they are. It cannot, the scale cannot tell them that what are the things you need to improve on. It will just tell them what is your particular level that you have started on with. So that we wanted a framework that would, suit that particular thing, and then it had been applied in Western countries. I get your point about, being a colony. Why would we do it? The thing is, we have, even though we have gained independence, but English is sort of the main language. Sort of in linguistics terms, we say lingua franca. So it's still the main language that is being used in Fiji. So there would sort of be no way going around it of trying not to use something from the Western world. You'd have to come up with something. And there hasn't been a localized version of the frameworks as of yet. Probably in postdoc, maybe I would like to come up with, something that can be used in the South Pacific context. So I hope that answered.
No, it does. And we can write a paper together. Why not?
Fantastic. Yes.
So in regards to, the undergraduates, going back to the students then, I am trying to think as to why you would want to conduct this research. What was the push behind it? Is it personal, or is it just it was a topic that was available? What got you here in terms of your journey?
I think that's the best question anybody could ask me, because we because as you said, what got into you? Because here we have a very vibrant HDR community at the university. And sometimes, people are asking, so I'm thinking of a topic, how can I do? But for me, the topic came because of a news article that ran in the Fiji media. So it was actually the Prime Minister, and I put that in my thesis anyway. So he had commented that, I think this was back in 2015, he had attended a function, and then in the function he had commented that the graduates who are coming out of universities in Fiji, they are not able to write proficiently, they don't have the right academic English skills, they are not able to write emails, simple things like this, like they're not able to write emails and all of these things. So I really started thinking, I said, well, he is saying that this is coming from an authority, but obviously he's not an academic, so he won't have the data to back this up. So I said, let me take up that idea and see whether our universities are preparing our students for, the workforce when they're going, will they have that English proficiency or not? So that's how the topic came. Of course, there was a lot of refining happening with the supervisors and all, but your question is to do with how the topic generated, or question generated. It was that one news article, so I went through it quite a number of times, and I said, how can this develop into a research, or how can we look at it? And that's when this framework started and all. The second part of the educational inequality bit, my professor and we had a talk, and he said, it's fine to look at their writing skills, but what is causing this? What is causing their skills to? There must be some kind of educational inequality. So that was a second part of it, and I think that really pushed the project, I think, in a different side as well. So yeah.
And the question that I had, as you've just finished that syntax, it relates to that, is, you've put it as educational inequalities, as you've rightly said. But what do you mean by that? Because inequalities can, we know what inequality is, but what does that mean for your research exactly, so that the audience at home can understand?
Yes, fantastic. Yes, inequalities in itself is, we can have any kind of inequalities. So educational inequalities that we were looking at is, what are the forms of things the students don't have access to? Or what are the kind of things that they have access to probably, but they're not able to make full use of it? I'll give you one example. Some students said that, they had access to library facilities, very good library facilities, whether it is rural schools or urban schools. But at the same time, some students said, we actually had a library, but the number of books were the same when we started a primary school, and when we finished, it was the same. A student said, I could memorize there were 10 books in the library from the time I started. When I left, they were there, and they were the same books. There was no movement in it, So one of those is looking at resources. So that was one library. Another form of inequality was the medium of instruction, which we say is the language that they use to communicate. So we had one of the interviewees, she came from an island school, and then she moved to an urban high school. So the first year, she was telling me she was really struggling, she was really struggling because the language was such a big problem for her. She couldn't understand English, or even if she wanted to communicate with friends, she couldn't, because the language was such a big problem for her. It was, I felt so sorry for her, but just listening to her, and I said, so what did you do? She said, I would spend most of my time just sitting in the library. I couldn't make friends. I would sit in the library and, try and see if I could upskill my English skills, and then I would try to communicate, but very slowly try to communicate. She, had this huge problem with the grammar and all of those things. That's one aspect of it. And in terms of resources, so in terms of resources, there was a huge thing. I think all the students complained about resources. I think all the students said that, the biggest inequality was we didn't have resources. So except for one particular, I think two particular students, they said that, oh, we had printing facility in school. We could print whatever we wanted. We just had to pay, but we could print. Others didn't have computers. Others didn't have internet access. And one particular school, I think, even said that they didn't have electricity. So while they were attending the school, so these are the different forms of inequality. So no access to resources or lack of access to resources, and then language barrier is a big problem over there as well. And then, of course, the other thing that I said, that access to infrastructure, or in general, you can say that whether you have access to computers to get resources. Because interestingly, there was one rural school, and this student really surprised me. He said we had he started talking. It was a rural school, I think, rural primary school or urban school. And then we talked about resources. He said we didn't have much resources. We only had 8 laptops in the school. And I'm looking at him and I'm saying, 8 laptops in the school. And it's a rural school. Urban school students told me they didn't have any laptops or anything. So inequality, it's very difficult to say that, oh, only the rural schools are affected. Well, look at this example. What can you say? I hope it has shed some light.
It does, but then it's got me thinking. In terms of inequality, in terms of the example that you've just given. Yes. So would you say, I don't know if you've picked this up in terms of your research, but I'm just thinking out loud, and I'm thinking maybe you did observe that maybe in rural areas whereby there were rich people, affluent people that came from there, those schools had it better, maybe solar energy, and they had electricity and laptops. And then those whereby they were quite disadvantaged, maybe next to the rivers and further afield, where they were isolated, maybe that's why they didn't have those facilities. Or maybe the government just invested in certain areas because they wanted to be voted in. Just making this up. I do want to come to Fiji. What are your thoughts on that?
So this was something that I sort of just put towards the students. I didn't want to sort of assume anything, so I sort of asked them. I put that in the conversation. So I think one particular student, she told me, she said, because obviously when they come to the university, they're still talking about, amongst them friends, they're still talking about how their high school or whichever school they came from. So then she told me, she said, we noticed that the distribution of resources was not equal. That's what they found out. So resources means textbooks. Some schools did not even have charts, like simple charts to deal with or something. So I would just take that as an answer, that it's to do with the distribution of resources. So when the government has to distribute resources, I mean, what mechanisms are they employing that all the schools are able to get equal resources? Because this person is telling me that she has just finished high school, and she's telling me, well, we didn't have this, but my friend attended this school and she had that. So it just comes down to distribution of resources, because yes, the schools are in rural areas, yes, the schools are in islands, the schools are in urban areas. I mean, we are not going to dismantle these schools, or we cannot say that just because they are in the islands, we're going to completely shut you down because we want to promote something else. We cannot do that. So, but what we can do is to provide these schools, or probably prioritize these schools and give them more resources, just so that they can get up there, and then we do a distribution of equal resources, equal distribution of books and all these facilities.
Thank you very much for your response. I guess the next question, just coming from that, is how does your research then benefit, your data subjects, to put it loosely in that sense? How does, because obviously you're looking at first year students, and I'm sure that the problem is bigger than that. As you've mentioned, in terms of sending emails at work, etc., that's when you've graduated probably. So, in terms of current situation and your passion, and based on what the president said and your need to go ahead and, with this title, how does it help the wider community and also those who are affected immediately?
Right. So there are 2 or 3 ways that the project is going to benefit. On a personal level, I'll talk about that in a bit, how it has a personal impact on me. But firstly, so because there might be just an assumption at the moment that our students are progressing well, and we don't need to do anything else. But in my study, I sort of had writing interventions that the students had to go through with these things. And when I interviewed them at the end, I said, what do you think about the writing interventions? How helpful were these to you? And then the students said that from the writing intervention, I was able to pick out on these skills which I did not have. Simple skills like reading skills, researching skills, critiquing, or just being sure that you punctuate correctly. There was one comment a student said that in high school we are not paying attention to punctuation, but in university there is. So it means the writing intervention was working. So through my study, I'm going to inform widely and publish widely about this, that the policymakers, university course writers, university management, or the people who are responsible for that, if they can incorporate more writing intervention tasks in the students' first year, that will show a good progression. Because when they came in, when we did the test of the students, there was a huge majority. There was about, from the 120 students, I had about 90 students who were not up to par, their level of English, yes. So when we did the test again at the end of the year, you could see a huge change. They had definitely moved from the 120. There were only 9 students who had progress, but not significantly. But the rest, the or 111 had definitely moved up the ladder. So one of them is to inform policymakers of that, of the kind of things that they can happen. The other thing, coming back to educational inequalities, is again, the last study which sort of recorded a few of these things happened sort of 15 or 20 years ago. So 15 years, the world is not going to be the same, right? So we have already had 4 vaccines of COVID. So
tell me about, I'm even coughing now.
so in the 15 year, what have we recorded? Because technology has changed, the approach in teaching style has changed. But what are these issues? What are the students still facing today? So those things have not been documented. Now my research is bringing that out and informing the people who are going to make the decisions that yes, there's a shortage of teachers. And what is causing the shortage of teachers? There is a problem. So definitely. Then we are emphasizing so much on the English language, but the students are having big problems with the English language. They're not able to, these are not to do just with their studies, in the sense that the mental well-being, the students are stressed. They're having this kind of problem that how am I going to approach my teachers? Again, that was another finding that, somebody said, we are unable to approach teachers, or in university, we are unable to approach lecturers because we don't feel comfortable, or there is sort of that, So this is who is going to benefit. This is the university is going to try, and then not only one university, the university, others are supposed to try and see that these are the problems our students have. And if we can change our approach, we are going to have a very smooth learning and teaching process. Because what happens right now is, well, you are just giving them the assignment and they're just doing it. Whether they, it's a machine learning kind of thing, right? Yeah. So, but the human approach comes from this particular study. So And that's to do with it in a very technical sort of side, in a personal side. So I looked at all these students who talked about libraries, and then I sort of, it gave me an idea. I said, what am I going to do postdoc, what I'm going to do after my studies. So I have decided that when I go back to Fiji, well, after my studies next year or something, slowly I'm going to start a trust under my mother's name, because she passed away 2 years ago due to cancer. So, but she really wanted us to study, all the children to study. So under her name, I'm going to start a trust, and I'm slowly going to, start talking to, like just take one particular town or district, see the number of schools there are, and just focus on that particular town until I've got their library set up. That's my project, to look at how I can set their library, how I can put more library books there. I don't want, in 10 years, another student telling me that there were only 10 books in the library. In the 80s. And when I finished, they were the same books. So I don't want this. So it's just something that I want to start off on my own. I'm not even thinking about donors. I'm not even thinking about sponsorship. Once this sort of keeps going, and I've got the a structure going on, then I can involve other people and say that, okay, this is what I'm doing for Fiji. Would you like to, come in? So I hope I have explained all the benefits of the project.
No, I mean, I love what you've said. So the policy writers, I understood that in terms of the universities as well, to come up with a human approach, which is what you said, instead of the factory built in and out process. And also in terms of your passion, and that you've seen that there's a lack, and if you're looking at the third generation further down the line, you don't want them to go through what these students are going through. So I see that, and I can see the passion as well linking into a postdoc, like you said, in terms of going further with your research. So thank you very much. No, we understood that. I think everyone at home got that. So in terms of the grounded theory methods then,
Yes.
Could you please explain what that is and why you've gone for that approach, and also why 120 was the perfect number for your research?
Okay, fantastic. Those are a lot of questions in one go, Noma.
Yes, but they do link.
So I'll start off with the methodology first. So
Yes.
when I was sending out research intents to universities, when I started thinking about doing a PhD, that's in 2019. I initially started off with a sort of a quantitative study that I was going to do, and get the data and all of these things. And we had a supervision meeting, and when I actually got enrolled, and my professor said to me, he said, Prash, I think we can choose something else which will sort of give us more insights rather than just a quantitative method that is just giving us statistics. We need to have a human narrative in this, because this problem seems bigger than what it is looking right now. We need to have that. So then I started looking at other methodologies. I tried to see what I could do, case studies or mixed methods or other things. And then when I read up on grounded theory, I found that the data, everything is the data itself is your everything that you can come up with. The theory or everything that you can come up is from the data, and you need to start looking at the data. You need to engage with the data as much as possible. Then I had not had any experience with that. So I started reading up more on this, looking at more on this, and I sort of fell in love with the methodology, to be honest. I thought
You fell in love. Love it.
There's this particular authority on the book. Her name is Kathy Bucrat, and she's a professor in UK. And her book, she has gone back to, of course, the people who had started the methodology, but she, in her book, made it so clear about the steps that were there. I mean, now when I tell my friends I'm using grounded theory, they're like, "Oh my God, that's so difficult. How are you doing it?" And then you study longitudinal study. How are you doing it? I said, no, it's just when you connect with the methodology, So the grounded theory is used to explain a phenomenon. That's what the basic idea about grounded theory methodology is, that you try and explain something using this particular methodology. And the very interesting thing about the grounded theory is whatever data you have at the beginning, it's not just the end. You need to refine this in 3 stages. So you have open coding data, you have selective coding data, and then you have theory coding data. So whatever you found at the beginning, like when I started off looking at themes that had come out on educational inequalities, first sort of we got 18 themes that were coming in different places, from high schools, from universities, and from primary school. Then when we refined it, we ended up with 11 in the second stage, because we linked the similarities and all. When we ended the study, sort of, we found out there were 6, solid 6, which were coming from all of these things. So, you know, if it is just a qualitative design, then somebody will just say, I've got 18 themes, you know, look at me, I've got 18 themes. But then when you start going through that, you'll be saying, oh, but these are similar, these are similar, these are similar. Grounded theory lets you freely look at it again, refine it, and then come up with it. So that was what I really liked about it. And then it doesn't finish there, apparently. So when you when you have a set of the final themes, you still need to link this to the literature. This needs to be linked to the literature. So not your existing literature. This is something that, you know, your theories have come. So how is it connecting with the literature? So that connection actually takes a bit of time, because you have a lot of reading to do and you have to link it to that. And that's sort of that's called the theoretical integration area that happens. And when I looked at it, and then when I saw it, I said, yeah, this was a good methodology to use, because it has given me the kind of issues the students are facing, what can be the possible solutions, because the students sort of suggested it. One of the suggestions was that we need more workshops, we need more training after hours. So whatever we are doing with the school, forget about it. We want more. So these are suggestions which are coming from the students, you know, they are saying it, but there's a theme that is coming in. And grounded theory is allowing us to use those themes and explain those themes. So that's how I came up with the methodology. So to summarize that, the methodology was sort of provoked by my supervisor. He had kind of, you know, said, look for something that is going to explain the problem that we are the problem that you have. So I looked up so many methods. Grounded theory was looking into explaining the phenomenon. So I chose that. And then, of course, I fell in love with the methodology. So
It's love at first sight. But I've got Tina Turner in my head now. What's love to do?
oh no.
Okay.